we're going to answer a very important question today. Who controls the mafia in 2025? This is a question that has plagued philosophers since the dawn of time, or at least since the end of The Godfather Part 2. Seriously, who runs the Italian-American mafia in this day and age? They're still powerful crime bosses pulling the strings from their luxurious mansions? Or has the mafia crumbled into irrelevance like a stale biscotti? Well, grab your complimentary cannoli, because we're about to find out. This video comes with a trigger warning for all our mob movie-loving mafiosos out there. We'll be spilling some serious spoilers about one of the greatest films ever made, The Godfather. Now let's get to it. If you grew up watching mafia movies on late-night cable, you probably have an image in your head of what a traditional mafia boss looks like. Think about it. There's always a huge guy with a thick mustache and a thick accent who looks like he hasn't shaved in a week even though he probably just did. And he's usually wearing a pinstripe suit that makes him look like a banker. But don't be fooled. This guy isn't here to talk about compound interest. He's here to talk about something much more dangerous, like whacking someone with a baseball bat or making them an offer they can't refuse. It's hard to tell which one is worse. In the movies, these guys are always the heads of their own crime families, controlling everything from gambling and loan sharking to narcotics and construction. They run the city with an iron fist, taking bribes from politicians and making sure everyone around them knows not to cross them. And when they do get crossed, well, you don't want to stick around to see what happens next. But let us ask you this. What if we told you that this whole image of the mafia boss might be a little bit off? In fact, what if we told you that there aren't any real mafia bosses left? Okay? Maybe that's a bit too clickbaity, but hear us out. Things have changed a lot since the days of Al Capone and Lucky Luciano, and the mafia has had to change with them. So if the old school bosses are gone, who's running the show now? The thing about being the boss of a crime family is that it's not exactly a job that you can put on your resume. Most of the time, it's a position that's earned through a combination of blood ties and sheer ruthlessness. You don't get to be the boss by being the nice guy. In fact, being nice is probably the fastest way to get whacked in the mafia. So if you're looking to make it to the top of the mafia food chain, you got to be willing to get your hands dirty. Let's face it, most of us are not exactly cut out for that kind of life. Back in the day, the bosses were often the ones pulling the strings from the shadows. It's making big decisions that affected the entire family. They were the ones who decided whether to go to war with another family, whether to expand into a new racket, and whether to turn a cop into a dead guy. Basically, they were the CEOs of the mafia. But in 2025, things have changed a bit. The mafia isn't as big or as powerful as it once was, and the bosses don't have the same level of control. For starters, the mafia has gotten a lot less violent in recent years. It's not exactly profitable to go around whacking people, especially when there's a good chance you'll end up on trial for murder. Not to mention, it's just not as necessary as it used to be. Thanks to the rise of organized crime, groups like the mafia have been able to make a lot of money without resorting to violence. In fact, they've been able to stay under the radar, which is half the battle when it comes to avoiding the cops. These days, the mafia is more likely to get involved in white-collar crime, it's like fraud and embezzlement, than they are to get their hands dirty with something like murder. So if the bosses aren't as powerful as they used to be, who is? That's where things get interesting. Instead of having one big boss, the power has devolved into the hands of many, much like the political structure of ancient Athens. Well, not exactly. What we mean is that power has passed to the underbosses. If you're not familiar with mafia lingo, the underboss is basically the second in command. He's the guy who takes orders from the boss, but also helps run the day-to-day operations of the crime family. He's also the guy who takes over when the boss gets whacked. So yeah, being an underboss is pretty important. Nowadays, there isn't really such a thing as a boss in the mafia, at least not in the traditional sense. The bosses are gone, but the underbosses are still around, except now, they're the ones calling the shots. These guys are the real power brokers in the mafia, and they're the ones who need to be feared. They're the ones who decide how the family operates and how the money gets spent. They're also the ones who keep the peace between the families, which is no easy feat considering the mafia is basically one big dysfunctional family reunion. But why is this happening? Why has power devolved to the underbosses? Well, it's mostly because of the changing times. Mafia isn't what it used to be, and neither are its members. These days, the members of the mafia are more educated and more sophisticated than their predecessors. They know that violence does and always solve problems, and that sometimes it is better to go legit than to go splat. Take, for example, the Gambino crime family. This is one of the 5 original mafia families that make up the Commission, the governing body of the American mafia, and it's also one of the most powerful families there is. Now, the Gambino family has had its fair share of bosses, including the infamous Carlo Gambino himself. But who's in charge now? Well, it's not a boss, it's an underboss, a guy named Anthony Nasso. Nasso isn't your typical mafia boss. It's not a violent thug. It's actually a pretty smart guy who knows how to stay out of the spotlight. He's also the kind of guy who can make big decisions that affect the entire family. So when the boss steps down or gets whacked, Nasso is the natural choice to take over. That's why he's the underboss, baby. Now, Nasso isn't the only underboss in the mafia. There are plenty of other crime families with their own power brokers, but he is one of the most important. His decisions affect not only the Gambino family, but the entire mafia. So if you want to know who controls the mafia in 2025, you got to start with the underbosses. But wait, before you go out and try to whack the underbosses, you should probably know that it's not as easy as it looks in the movies. For starters, the underbosses are usually well protected. They're not the kind of guys you can sneak up on and whack with a baseball bat. Not to mention that the mafia isn't as tight-knit as it used to be. Back in the day, the code of silence was strong, and members of the mafia would take secrets to their grave. These days, though, the code is starting to break down. Guys are turning into snitches faster than you can say rat. So even if you do manage to whack an underboss, there's a good chance his underboss will turn into a snitch and ruin your day. So if you're thinking about getting involved in the mafia, you might want to rethink it. It's not all fun games, and you're not going to be the next Don Vito Corleone. Now, we know you're probably not planning on joining the mafia, but it never hurts to be prepared. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you need to know who's in charge, just look for the guy who looks like he hasn't shaved in a week. He's probably the underboss. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out our other videos like this one where we talked about whether or not the mafia is still a thing. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an upload.